Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Stories We Choose. Act 1, The Morning Light That Whispered Adventure. The first light of spring filtered softly through the linen curtains of the bedroom window. Pale golden beams kissed the edges of the room, brushing against the spines of old books stacked unevenly on a shelf and dancing across a collection of postcards pinned above the desk, remnants of faraway places, or dreams of them. Outside, the faint cooing of doves mingled with the distant hum of a waking town, and the branches of the cherry blossom tree by the gate swayed gently in the breeze, petals drifting like confetti. Down to the cobblestone walkway. Rowan lay in bed with one arm flung over his eyes, not quite ready to rise. It was that delicious moment of stillness where sleep hadn't quite left, but the world had started to call. The air in the room was cool but not cold, carrying with it the scent of dew and lilac. He turned on his side and glanced at the old alarm clock on his bedside table. It read 7:04 a.m. Though it had been 10 minutes slow since winter and he'd never bothered to fix it. He didn't need a clock to tell him what kind of day it would be. He could feel it in his bones. It was a spring morning, the kind that felt like it had been waiting quietly for its turn, stepping gently into the world like a guest not wanting to interrupt. Rowan swung his legs over the edge of the bed and sat up slowly, stretching until his joints popped. The wooden floor was cool beneath his feet, grounding. For a moment, he just sat there, hands resting on his knees, listening to the soft rustle of leaves outside and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. He shuffled into the kitchen, barefoot, and filled the kettle with water, placing it on the stove with a satisfying clink. The kitchen was a patchwork of collected mugs, handwritten recipes pinned to the fridge with mismatched magnets, and a terracotta pot of basil that leaned ever so slightly toward the window. As he waited for the water to boil, Rowan opened the back door and stepped out onto the small balcony overlooking a garden in gentle bloom. The garden had been planted years ago by his grandmother, and though it had grown a little wild around the edges, it still held her sense of order. Daffodils bobbed their heads in clusters, and a group of sparrows pecked at the stone path near the bird bath. Rowan breathed in deep, savoring the crispness in the air. When the kettle whistled, he returned inside, made a cup of Earl Grey with just a hint of honey, and settled near the window with the morning paper. But as his eyes scanned headlines that felt too gray for a morning so golden, he found his attention drifting elsewhere. He wasn't sure what he wanted, only that he didn't want the usual. That was when his phone buzzed on the windowsill. He reached for it without looking and answered. "Still in bed?" a cheerful voice asked on the other end. Rowan smiled instinctively. It was Ezra, his oldest friend, the kind of friend who knew when you needed something different even before you said it aloud. "Just got up." "Why, are you calling to drag me into something?" Rowan replied, already amused. Ezra laughed. Sort of. I was thinking. It's been a while since we did anything spontaneous. What do you say we hit the old fairgrounds? There's a pop-up flea market today. Vintage everything. Weird everything. You love that kind of thing. Rowan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. You do remember the last time we went to a flea market, you tried to barter with 3 expired movie tickets and a pocketful of chocolate coins. And I almost got that lava lamp. Ezra said defensively. Rowan chuckled, sipping his tea. All right, I'm in. But I'm not saving you from any more antique toy curses. They agreed to meet in an hour near the old tram stop where the vines grew thick along the fence. Rowan finished his tea, slipped into a soft gray t-shirt, faded jeans, and his favorite pair of battered leather boots. He ran a hand through his tousled hair and grabbed his camera, an old film Nikon he still insisted on using despite Ezra's complaints about digital convenience. As he stepped out the door, locking it behind him, Rowan felt something rare, anticipation. Not for anything grand or life-changing, but for the simple, quiet pleasure of the unknown. The kind of day that held a promise without needing to say it out loud. The walk through the neighborhood was like strolling through a painting. Windows were flung open to let the breeze in. A cat slept lazily on a sun-warmed windowsill. A couple of kids zipped by on rollerblades, laughing in bursts that echoed down the lane. A woman in a straw hat tended to a garden overflowing with tulips, and she waved as Rowan passed by. Beautiful morning, isn't it? She called. The best one in a while, Rowan replied with a smile. By the time he reached the tram stop, Ezra was already there, leaning against a post, wearing a faded denim jacket and sunglasses that didn't quite suit him. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. One for you, Ezra said, handing one over. It's not your fancy tea, but it's hot and bitter like all good decisions. Rowan took a sip and nodded approvingly. Let's go find some trouble. The tram arrived with a soft screech, and as they boarded, the wind picked up ever so slightly. Rowan looked out the window as the city began to glide past buildings, murals, flower stalls, balconies heavy with ivy. And somewhere in that moment, he felt the pull of a story beginning to unfold. Not a loud story. Not a heroic one. But one worth remembering. Act 2, where cobblestones meet curiosity. The tram hummed gently as it rolled along the sun-dappled tracks, each turn of the wheels bringing the city to life. Rowan and Ezra sat side by side, sipping coffee from cardboard cups that steamed ever so slightly in the morning chill. Through the tram's wide windows, the town passed by like a slideshow of everyday beauty, small cafes with striped awnings, bookstores still setting up sidewalk displays, and sleepy-eyed dogs lounging. Outside bakery doors. Did you bring cash this time? Rowan asked, glancing sideways. Ezra tilted his head thoughtfully. Mostly coins. And a gift card to a bookstore that closed down 2 years ago. Perfect. That'll get you, What, half a rusty lamp? Ezra smirked. Don't underestimate the power of confidence and vague nostalgia. The tram slowed with a squeak and a hiss, arriving at a quiet corner of town where ivy crept over stone walls and murals of birds and flowers covered the sides of old buildings. A hand-painted wooden sign welcomed them, Springtide Market, 1 day only. Below it, a chalkboard scribble read, Vintage Finds, Peculiar Stories, Homemade Lemonade. As they stepped off the tram, the air shifted. It was warmer here, somehow sweeter. Music floated in from unseen speakers, something mellow and jazzy with a slight warble, like it had been playing since the 1960s and just now reached their ears. A gentle breeze carried scents of cinnamon, citrus, and something that smelled suspiciously like fried dough. Rowan's eyes lit up instantly. The market stretched out across a cobbled plaza lined with trees in full bloom. Dozens of stalls, some with colorful tents and others just tables under the open sky, were arranged in lazy spirals like a sunflower in bloom. Banners fluttered. Wind chimes sang. And people wandered slowly, lost in their own little adventures. It's like someone designed this place just to tempt us into buying things we don't need, Ezra said, taking a deep breath. Correction, Rowan replied. Things we don't need but desperately want. They made their way into the heart of the market, where each stall offered its own little universe. One table was stacked with old board games, faded Monopoly sets, Scrabble tiles in mismatched tins, and a box of Clue with a mysterious blood-red stain on the corner. Next to it, a wiry man with spectacles was carefully arranging vintage cameras, some with leather straps worn smooth by time, others that looked like they'd never taken a single photo. Rowan paused, running his fingers lightly across the top of a twin-lens reflex camera. You ever think about who held these before us? He asked. Ezra was inspecting a tiny projector shaped like a rocket ship. Probably someone with too much free time and a love for dust. But Rowan lingered, imagining an old journalist capturing street life in black and white, or a young woman photographing her garden day by day, waiting for spring to arrive. Further down, a woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat sold postcards and letters bundled in twine, handwritten notes from decades past, their ink faded to sepia, their paper soft with age. Rowan picked up one addressed to "My dearest Arthur," and read the first line silently. I hope this letter reaches you before the leaves change again. It sent a shiver down his spine. So simple. So haunting. Meanwhile, Ezra had wandered to a stall run by a punk-looking teenager selling mystery jars, small glass jars sealed with wax and labels like Rain from Paris, 1978, or Whispers of a Daydream. He held one up to Rowan. This one's labeled A Laugh You Forgot. What do you think happens if you open it? Rowan raised an eyebrow. You get reminded of the time you laughed so hard you cried, probably at my expense. Ezra grinned. Tempting. They passed a vendor who sold nothing but keys, tiny brass ones, long iron skeleton keys, some that looked like they belonged to secret gardens or long-lost attics. Rowan picked one at random, turning it over in his hand. "Where do you think this opens?" he mused. Ezra leaned in conspiratorially. "Probably the trunk of someone's emotional baggage." They laughed and kept walking. At one particularly chaotic stall, cardboard boxes overflowed with vinyl records. The stall owner, a tall man in suspenders, was flipping through records with one hand and sipping black coffee with the other. Rowan's fingers moved instinctively to the crates, flipping past Sinatra, Joni Mitchell, Miles Davis, until he stopped. There it was. A cover he hadn't seen in years, a jazz record his grandfather used to play on quiet Sunday afternoons. The image was unmistakable, a saxophonist bathed in golden light, smoke curling upward, his eyes closed as if lost in a memory. He held the record for a moment longer than necessary. "Someone's having a moment," Ezra said softly beside him. Rowan nodded. "It's weird. I didn't even remember I missed this until now." He purchased the record without hesitation, and the stall owner gave him a knowing smile. "Good taste," the man said, "that one always finds the right person." The morning wore on, but time seemed suspended. People milled about at a leisurely pace, sipping lemonade from mason jars, chatting with strangers about forgotten books and antique brooches. There was no rush, no destination. Just exploration. Ezra, naturally, bought a vintage handheld game console that barely worked, a t-shirt with a faded graphic of a 1980s sci-fi movie, and a book titled How to Communicate with Garden Gnomes. Rowan bought the record, a leather-bound journal with delicate pressed flowers on the cover, and impulsively a tarnished brass key he couldn't quite explain. By noon, their canvas tote bags were satisfyingly heavy, their feet were tired, and their stomachs were growling. They made their way to the edge of the plaza, where food carts clustered beneath flowering trees. As they sat on a bench eating grilled cheese and tomato soup from paper bowls, Rowan leaned back and looked around. "It feels like this whole place is a secret," he said. "Like it only shows up for those who need it." Ezra nodded, mouth full. "Good thing we needed it." The sunlight filtered through the blossoms overhead, speckling their table with pink and gold. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew, today had already become a memory worth keeping. Act 3, Echoes between the pages. After finishing their lunch under the cherry blossoms, Rowan and Ezra wandered further into the quieter corners of the flea market. The crowd had thinned slightly as the midday warmth set in, and the edges of the market felt less like a shopping space and more like an attic of forgotten time. They turned a corner behind a stall selling old typewriters and stumbled upon a shaded nook half hidden by draped linen and hanging plants. It looked more like a secret reading room than a marketplace booth. A wooden sign above the entrance simply read, "Letters and Lives." Inside, the stall was curated like a museum of memory. There were no price tags, no flashy decorations, just tables of handwritten letters, diaries, pressed flowers, faded photographs, and beautifully weathered books arranged in quiet reverence. The air smelled like lavender and old paper. Rowan was immediately drawn in. He ran his fingers across the spines of journals wrapped in velvet ribbons. Some were locked with tiny clasps, others left open to random pages filled with elegant, slanted handwriting. One journal had a ribbon bookmark and the words "Start Here" scribbled on a note tucked between the pages. Ezra, meanwhile, was inspecting a series of envelopes bundled by decade. Letters from the 1940s, the 60s, someone even labeled theirs love, mostly unsent. That's either tragic or incredibly poetic. Rowan picked up a bundle marked Spring Correspondence, 1972 and slowly untied the twine. The top letter was addressed to Eleanor, my compass. His eyes danced over the lines. The garden bloomed early this year. Tulips have taken over the edges like they're racing the sun. You would have loved it? I planted bluebells near the porch just as you asked. I hope the sea still sings to you. He paused. The words struck something in him, something quiet and familiar. Ezra noticed his silence and tilted his head. Found something? Rowan gave a small nod. It's beautiful. And real. These were people, once. Their days mattered. Their thoughts lived on paper. It feels like eavesdropping on time. Ezra glanced at a nearby photo, a black and white portrait of a young couple sitting on a picnic blanket, smiling at something off camera. It's like this whole place is full of echoes. The stall owner, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned in a bun, appeared beside them quietly. She wore a linen apron smudged with ink and lavender petals. Everything here was gifted, she said softly, as though continuing a conversation they hadn't realized had started. Some families bring old letters because they don't want them forgotten. Some simply want to let go. But memory, when shared, becomes a little less heavy. Rowan nodded slowly. That's beautiful. She smiled. You can take one. Just one. Whichever speaks loudest. He looked down again at the bundle in his hand, then hesitated. Something else caught his eye, a slim notebook hidden near the back corner of the table. Unlike the others, it was unbound, pages yellowed and soft, held together only by a ribbon. The front page read in faded pencil. The garden beneath the rain. He opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten vignettes, tiny snapshots of a life lived in silence and beauty. Short pieces like poems, but not quite poems. A few lines caught his breath. Some afternoons feel like memories before they begin. He said he'd return before the lavender faded. He didn't. The rain spoke in my mother's voice today. The words were aching, gentle, full of stories left untold. Rowan could see it instantly, this was someone's way of holding on. I'll take this one, he said quietly. The woman didn't ask for money. She simply wrapped the notebook in brown paper and tied it with a strand of grey twine. Carry it well, she whispered. As they stepped back out into the market, the air had changed. Clouds had begun gathering gently over the plaza, casting a silvery filter on the world. Wind rustled through paper lanterns and ruffled the petals in people's hair. But neither of them minded. They walked in silence for a while, until Ezra broke it. "You ever wonder if someone will find something of yours like that one day?" he asked. Rowan looked down at the wrapped notebook in his hands. "Maybe. But I think it's enough just to have lived something worth remembering." Ezra nodded thoughtfully. "Still, I should start writing weirder journal entries. Just in case." They both laughed, and the mood lifted slightly. But inside, Rowan felt something shift. Not sadness exactly, but a deeper awareness that today wasn't just a good day. It was a thread. A thread connecting lives that had passed, stories never told aloud, and the quiet realization that some moments don't need to be loud to matter. As they continued walking, Rowan slid the notebook into his canvas bag, next to the jazz record and the brass key. He didn't know yet what any of it meant. But somehow, it all felt connected. And the day wasn't over yet. Act 4, The Key That Didn't Belong to Anything. The afternoon sun flickered like candlelight through shifting clouds, casting long golden shadows over the cobblestones. By now, the market was full. Children chased soap bubbles near the fountain, a woman with a ukulele played slow, haunting melodies under a willow tree, and the smell of cinnamon, old leather, and spiced tea mingled with the warmth of spring. Rowan found himself walking slower. It wasn't fatigue. It was something else, something about the rhythm of the day that demanded softness, presence. Every step felt like part of a dream he didn't want to wake from. Ezra, as always, kept his pace erratic, sometimes stopping dead in his tracks to examine a ceramic owl, other times skipping ahead to argue with a vendor about the proper pronunciation of tchotchke. Rowan let him roam. His mind was still lingering on the handwritten lines from the notebook. Some afternoons feel like memories before they begin. He reached into his canvas bag and pulled out the small brass key he had bought earlier. It was cold, smooth, heavier than it looked. The kind of key that didn't belong to any modern lock. It had ornate grooves along the handle and a faint engraving on the head, a symbol he didn't recognize: two small crescent moons facing each other. "Still admiring your key to nowhere?" Ezra asked, suddenly reappearing beside him with a straw hat now perched on his head, slightly crooked. "It's strange," Rowan said. "I didn't even mean to buy it. I just reached for it." Ezra squinted at the key. "Looks like the sort of thing you find in the drawer of an old writing desk. You open it and find a letter from someone who disappeared without a trace. That's oddly specific." "Been thinking about writing a novel," Ezra said, dramatically flipping his imaginary hair. They turned a corner where the market curved into a quieter path, less vendors, more shade. Here, the stalls felt older, more antique than thrift. One shop was made entirely of old suitcases stacked in a circle, their lids open like treasure chests. Another had clocks, hundreds of them, none ticking, all frozen in different times. A sign above read, moments misplaced. Creepy, Ezra whispered. Delightful. 1 clock, near the edge, was stuck at 3:17. As Rowan passed it, the second hand gave a tiny, barely audible twitch. He blinked. Did you see that? See what? The clock. It moved. Ezra leaned in. Maybe you moved. Maybe time moved. Maybe we're all stuck in 3:17 and this is just a particularly detailed hallucination. Rowan rolled his eyes, but his fingers curled tighter around the brass key. Beyond the clock stall, tucked between two stone columns overgrown with ivy, was a narrow passage that didn't seem to be part of the main market. A small handwritten sign hung loosely from a wire. Curiosities that remember you. Okay, Ezra said. That's definitely either a trap or a story. Rowan shrugged. Maybe both. They entered. The passage opened into a space that looked like an attic built outdoors. Hanging light bulbs swayed from tangled cords, and stacks of mismatched books created corridors of paper. Trinkets sat on velvet cushions, snow globes with landscapes Rowan had never seen before, music boxes that hummed lullabies in languages he didn't recognize, and mirrors that reflected the room but not always themselves. At the center was a wooden cabinet, old and tall, with drawers of every shape and size. No labels. No keyholes. Except for one. One drawer, chest level, bore the same crescent moon symbol as the brass key in Rowan's hand. He froze. You're seeing that too, right? He whispered. Ezra was staring. I mean, I'd say this is a coincidence, but at this point, I'd also believe the cabinet grants wishes or opens a portal to 1940. Rowan stepped forward. The cabinet seemed to breathe with silence, ancient and unbothered. He reached out, slowly fitting the key into the lone lock. It slid in with a soft click. He turned it. The drawer creaked open. Inside, there was only one thing, a folded sheet of paper, thick and yellowed with age, yet the ink was fresh. Rowan took it out carefully. The handwriting was unfamiliar but elegant. To the finder of the key. You have been walking in stories longer than you realize. This is not the beginning. This is the remembering. He looked at Ezra. Ezra blinked. All right. I've officially gone from quirky day out to mild existential crisis. Rowan turned the page over. On the back was a map, a simple sketch of a place neither of them recognized. Trees, a stream, a small bridge, and a circle labeled the Listening Rock. At the bottom, you've already heard it? Rowan's heart beat faster, but not from fear. It was something else. like his whole life had been humming in the background, and this was the moment he finally noticed the melody. Ezra, though clearly trying to keep things light, had a faraway look in his eyes. "You think this is some kind of interactive art? Like a puzzle hunt?" "Maybe," Rowan said. "But maybe it's something else." They left the stall without speaking much more. The map was tucked inside Rowan's journal now, alongside the notebook and the letters. The key. He wore it around his neck, using a spare camera strap. The market continued on as before, children laughing, people bargaining, music rising and falling like the tide. But for Rowan and Ezra, something had changed. It wasn't just a market anymore. It was a threshold. And somewhere beyond the vendors and vintage teacups and forgotten clocks, a story had started to call their names. Act 5, The Rock That Listens. The rest of the afternoon passed like a whispered dream. Even as the market pulsed with laughter, bartering, and melodies from buskers, Rowan found himself distracted, his hand brushing the folded map inside his bag every few minutes, as if to make sure it was still there. The words on the note repeated over and over in his head, "You have been walking in stories longer than you realize." Ezra seemed equally caught in thought, which was rare. Usually the more animated of the two, he now moved quietly, eyes scanning the stalls without really seeing them. There was something about that map, about that drawer opening with a key that shouldn't have fit anywhere, that had silenced even his sarcasm. They didn't speak of it again until much later. It wasn't until twilight began to dip the sky in lavender and rose that Rowan finally said, "Do you want to go?" Ezra looked at him, then nodded. "Yeah. I think we're supposed to." Rowan unfolded the map and laid it across the hood of a vendor's closed cart. The ink shimmered faintly in the low light, and the sketch came alive with impossible clarity. The grove. The stream. The small bridge. The circle with the name, the Listening Rock. What was strange, though, was the familiarity. Rowan had the odd sensation he had seen this place before, not in dreams, exactly, but in the spaces between them. It felt like childhood. Like running through woods barefoot and not remembering how you got there. Like stories his grandfather used to tell, ones Rowan never thought much of until now. They left the market just as the vendors began packing up. The jazz player was still at the corner, but the tune had changed, slower, more pensive, as if even the music sensed a shift. Rowan and Ezra followed the cobblestone paths until they reached the edge of the town's parklands. Here, the neatly trimmed gardens gave way to something older, winding trails, moss-covered stones, and trees that bent low as though listening to the wind. They walked in near silence. Birdsong faded. The breeze quieted. All they heard were their own footsteps on leaves and the occasional creak of tree limbs overhead. "Weird question," Ezra said softly, "but does it feel like we're stepping out of time?" Rowan nodded. "It feels like we're walking into something that's been waiting." It didn't take long before the path began to mirror the one on the map exactly. The same curve of the stream. The same wooden bridge, its paint peeling and moss covered. They crossed it, their steps soft, reverent. And then they saw it. The rock. It sat at the edge of a clearing, half covered in ivy, shaped not like a boulder but like an old chair carved by the earth itself. Smooth, curved, with a wide flat face angled toward the sky. The listening rock. It was unmistakable. They approached slowly. Rowan reached out first, brushing the surface. It was warm. Not sun warm, but something deeper, like it held stories in its stone skin. Ezra circled around it, eyes scanning for anything writing, symbols, even tricks. It's just a rock. Right. But then Rowan sat down. He didn't know why. He just felt it. As soon as he did, the forest changed. Not visibly. Not even audibly. But something shifted in the feeling of the place. Like the trees exhaled. Like silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full. He closed his eyes. And he began to hear. It wasn't sound, not in the normal way. It was as though the memories of the forest pressed gently against his thoughts. Echoes. Murmurs. Children laughing in another decade. A woman humming an old song. A man whispering a promise. Wind through windows that no longer existed. Ezra, watching from the side, noticed Rowan's face had softened. "What is it?" he asked. Rowan opened his eyes slowly. "I heard someone say my name." Ezra froze. "Okay." "Nope. You're messing with me." "I'm not." Rowan stood, breath shaky but calm. "It wasn't a voice I recognize. But it felt like someone remembered me. Like I belonged to something bigger." Ezra touched the rock himself. For a second, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a flicker behind his eyes, a memory that wasn't his own. A boy holding a box of letters, burying them beneath this very tree. A girl standing in the rain, reading them aloud. A flash of sorrow. A kiss. Then gone. Ezra stepped back quickly, heart pounding. Okay. That was not normal. Rowan smiled faintly. "No. But it felt right, didn't it?" They stood in silence together, the forest darkening around them. Fireflies began to appear, floating gently through the clearing like tiny messengers from another world. Rowan took out the map again. A new line had appeared. A path drawn in ink that hadn't been there before, leading from the listening rock deeper into the woods. At the end of the path, a single word. Return. Ezra looked over his shoulder. Well, I guess we're not done yet. Rowan folded the map and tucked it back inside his journal. I don't think we've even started. They turned to follow the new trail. And somewhere, not far behind them, a breeze stirred the ivy over the rock. A voice, soft as a sigh, passed through the trees. Welcome back. Act 6, The Path That Remembers You. The trail leading away from the listening rock was narrow and overgrown, as if nature itself had tried to keep it hidden. But the newly drawn line on the map was clear. It wove between trees and across shallow brooks, into a part of the forest Rowan had never noticed before, though something deep within him insisted he had once known it. Rowan and Ezra walked in near silence. The only sounds were the hush of wind through tall grass and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures darting through the underbrush. It wasn't frightening. It was reverent. As if the forest itself were holding its breath. You notice, Ezra said after a while, how the light hasn't changed since we left the rock. Rowan glanced up. The canopy was dense, but what filtered through wasn't the soft orange of sunset. It was neither day nor night. Almost like twilight frozen in place. Time had begun to stretch and fold, bending softly like the pages of an old book. I think we left the clock behind, Rowan said, only half joking. As they walked further, small changes began to emerge. The path became smoother, the dirt more compact, like it had been walked by countless feet long ago. Lanterns hung from tree branches, unlit but gently swaying, as if remembering their former glow. Occasionally, they passed wooden signs written in fading ink, to those who return. Leave nothing unspoken. The archive listens. Ezra kept touching the trees, dragging his fingers along their bark. Do you feel like we're walking into a story we forgot we were part of? Rowan nodded slowly. Like someone wrote this long ago, and we're just now stepping back into it. Then, ahead, the trail opened into a clearing unlike anything they had expected. A circular grove, ringed by ancient trees so tall their tops disappeared into the mist. In the center stood a small stone structure half collapsed, covered in vines and moss. It looked like a miniature temple, or a shrine, though no religion Rowan knew had symbols like these. Carved above the arched doorway was a phrase. Those who remember may pass. Ezra raised an eyebrow. Cryptic. I love it. They stepped inside. The interior was cool and silent. A skylight of broken stone let a beam of eternal twilight pour into the chamber. The floor was tiled in mosaic stars, rivers, silhouettes of people holding hands, eyes drawn in spirals. All around the circular walls were niches, and in each one sat an object, a lock of hair in a vial, a faded ribbon, a rusted bell, a pocket watch with no hands. And at the far end, atop a stone pedestal, was a book. Not dusty. Not decayed. Pristine. Bound in navy blue leather, with the same crescent moons from Rowan's key embossed on the cover. He stepped forward slowly, Ezra at his side. On the first page, there were no words. Just an illustration, two boys walking through a market filled with strange objects. It was them. Rowan turned the page. There they were again, standing in front of the listening rock. Turned again. The cabinet of drawers. The drawer with the note. The map. Ezra gasped softly. Rowan, this is our day. Rowan stared at the next blank page. It had no illustration, only a thin line at the top. Waiting. This book is writing itself, Rowan said. Ezra pointed. Or waiting for us to write it? Rowan picked up the pen resting beside the book. As soon as his fingers touched it, the world shifted again. Memories flooded him, not just his own, but echoes of others. A woman sitting at this pedestal a century ago, writing her name next to a promise. A child drawing stars into the margins. A soldier sketching a locket and leaving it behind. These were the recorded lives of wanderers who had found this place and, for a moment, became part of its pulse. He looked at Ezra. I think this place is alive with memory, Rowan whispered. It collects stories. Maybe it's even why the market exists. To lead people here. Ezra looked around, voice low with awe. So what do we do now? Rowan opened to the blank page again. He didn't write his name. He didn't need to. Instead, he drew the key. And beneath it, he wrote, "This story is not finished." As he closed the book, the beam of twilight above flickered, and for a moment, the entire chamber shimmered as though it were underwater. The air felt charged, as if the space had acknowledged them, and was now ready to release them. They stepped outside. But the grove had changed. Where once it had been still and quiet, now it was gently glowing. Fireflies circled them in spirals. A faint melody, no source, just sound, rose from the trees. The path behind them had disappeared. Only a new path, glowing faintly with mossy light, led forward. Ezra took a deep breath. We're in it now. Whatever it is. Rowan smiled. Let's find out. They followed the light. And behind them, inside the shrine, the book sat quietly, its next page fluttering open on its own. Waiting for what came next. Act 7, The Garden of Remembered Things. The new path was not made of stone, or dirt, or anything Rowan could name. It glowed faintly beneath their feet, soft and green like bioluminescent moss, pulsing in rhythm with their steps. It didn't wind or twist. It led straight ahead, unwavering, as if it knew precisely where they needed to go, even if they didn't. The air had changed too. It wasn't colder or warmer, but somehow denser, filled with the scent of rain on old wood and something floral, like lavender that had been dried and kept in drawers for decades. The silence was deeper now, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something listening. Ezra walked quietly beside him, unusually still. He had removed the straw hat, holding it loosely in one hand. His gaze was alert, eyes moving from tree to tree like they might whisper secrets at any moment. "Rowan," he said finally, voice low. "Are we still in the forest?" Rowan hesitated. "Yes, and no. I think we've stepped into a memory of it." The trees around them weren't quite real anymore. Some shimmered faintly, like reflections in rippling water. Others shifted subtly, branches bending, blossoms appearing and vanishing as though echoing forgotten seasons. The stars above flickered in unfamiliar constellations. And then they saw it. The path ended at the edge of a vast open space, framed by trees but unlike any natural clearing. It was a garden, but one like neither had ever seen. It stretched endlessly, filled with objects instead of plants, rusted tricycles and typewriters, cracked teacups, rain-streaked photographs pinned to twine, broken clocks still ticking without rhythm. Each item sat on a pedestal of stone, bathed in a soft, golden glow. It was not a graveyard. It was not a museum. It was a place where memories had chosen to rest. A sign carved into the arch above the entrance read, "The Garden of Remembered Things." Rowan's breath caught. "They're not junk," he murmured. "They're echoes. Lives." Ezra stepped forward, drawn to a tiny bookshelf stacked with well-worn journals. He picked one up carefully, flipping through its pages. His lips moved as he read, then stopped. His face paled. Rowan approached. "What is it?" Ezra showed him a passage. July 9. "I told him today that I wasn't ready. Not for forever. I saw the hurt in his eyes and hated myself for it. But I knew, if I said yes now, it wouldn't be real. And I want forever to be real." Ezra stared at the page like it had slapped him. "I wrote something almost exactly like that. Years ago. In a journal I never showed anyone." Rowan felt a chill that wasn't cold. He turned slowly to the nearest pedestal, a cracked ceramic bowl filled with marbles. On its rim was etched, "For the games we never finished." He remembered a summer afternoon, age 9, when his sister had stormed off mid-game, never returning to finish. A day so small, so ordinary, he hadn't thought of it in years. Yet here it was. Solid. Waiting. "This place, it's pulling from us," Rowan whispered. "From what we've forgotten. Or what we didn't know we remembered." They walked deeper. Each turn brought new memories, not all theirs. Some items sparked nothing. Others hid like a breath caught in the throat. A single ballet slipper with a torn ribbon. A music box that played only 3 notes. A fountain pen with dried ink, its nib bent just so. And then, they found a bench. Simple, wooden, unremarkable except for the carving across the top rail. He sat here every Thursday. Rain or shine. Rowan's knees went weak. He didn't know how, but he knew, this bench had belonged to his grandfather. The one who had taken him to the park every Thursday before he passed away. They used to sit, eat sandwiches, and watch ducks float in circles. He reached out and sat down. The world shifted. Suddenly, he was no longer in the garden. Not exactly. He was sitting beside the memory. Not a ghost. Not a vision. But a presence. The warmth of his grandfather's shoulder brushing his. The crinkle of sandwich paper. The low hum of a familiar tune he hadn't heard in over a decade. No words. Just being. A tear slid down Rowan's cheek. Ezra placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. I think, Ezra said gently, we're supposed to remember. Not just see. Feel. And so they did. They walked the garden for what felt like hours, maybe days, maybe no time at all. Time was irrelevant here. What mattered was the remembering. The quiet acknowledgement of moments too often buried beneath the weight of moving on. They weren't alone, either. Now and then, they saw other figures, some flickering like old film, some clearer. A girl tracing the handle of a wooden spoon. A man standing before a toy train, tears streaking his cheeks. A woman sitting beside a pair of dancing shoes, eyes closed, swaying to a tune only she could hear. Everyone here was remembering. Rowan turned to Ezra. We should leave something behind. Ezra blinked. Like what? Rowan pulled the small brass key from around his neck. It was never really mine, he said. It brought me here. Maybe someone else will need it. He found an empty pedestal near the edge of the garden. No inscription. Just a place waiting. Rowan placed the key down gently, and as he did, a soft light enveloped it. A new line carved itself onto the stone beneath it. For the one who feels the lock but hasn't found a door. Ezra stepped forward. From his satchel, he took out the faded photograph they had found in the market, 2 strangers on a picnic, forever smiling at something unseen. He set it beside the key. For the memories we don't recognize, but still carry. The light dimmed. The garden exhaled. A new path unfurled in front of them, this one lined with hanging lanterns, their glow pulsing slowly, like heartbeats. Ezra looked at Rowan. Ready? Rowan nodded. I don't know where this leads, Ezra said. Rowan smiled. That's the best part. And they stepped forward, into a future woven from memory. Act 8, Where the Forgotten Speak. The path of lanterns wound gently forward, each light pulsing with a soft rhythm like fireflies that had learned to glow in time with human hearts. Rowan and Ezra followed the trail in silence, their thoughts still anchored in the garden behind them. They had left something of themselves there, and carried something unseen in return. The air shifted as they walked. The forest no longer looked like a forest. The trees thinned and stretched, their trunks becoming columns of pale light. The ground beneath their feet softened, no longer moss, but a smooth, glassy surface that shimmered faintly with colors that changed when you blinked. Blues became silvers. Silvers became soft violets. Then, voices. At first just whispers, impossible to understand. But then, like turning the dial on an old radio, the voices came into focus, layered, distant, not speaking to them, but around them. Rowan slowed his steps. "Do you hear that?" Ezra nodded, wide-eyed. "It's like someone's telling stories. Dozens of them. At once." They walked further, and the whispers became words. A child's voice, "He never came back after the summer rains. But I kept the shell he gave me." A woman, elderly, laughing softly, "I wore that red coat until it fell apart. He said I looked like fire when I danced." A young man, wistful, "It wasn't the mistake I regret. It was not writing the letter I should have." Rowan's skin prickled. Ezra exhaled slowly. This place is alive with memory. Ahead, a building began to take shape. It wasn't built of wood or stone, but of language, literal lines of text that spiraled upward into walls, columns, and arched windows. Each sentence hovered and shimmered, written in different styles, cursive, printed, blocky, elegant. As they approached, the text folded inward, forming a massive entryway. Above the doorway, glowing words rearranged themselves until they read, "The Archive of the Unspoken." Ezra blinked. This is something else entirely." Rowan nodded. "It's like the place where forgotten truths come to rest." They entered. Inside, there were no shelves. No books. No furniture. Only stories floating in the air like glowing ribbons, moving gently like kelp under the ocean. Each one flickered with light and shadow, sometimes showing fragments of scenes, other times fading into mist. Rowan reached out. A ribbon of memory curled toward his hand. As he touched it, the world around him dimmed and a vision unfolded. A boy sat at a window, writing furiously in a journal. His eyes were red. He ripped out a page, crumpled it, then stared at it for a long time before whispering, "She deserves to know. But I'm too late." Then it faded. Rowan staggered back slightly. Ezra caught him. "You okay?" "Yes. I think I just lived someone's regret. A real one. Ezra turned to a different ribbon, touched it, and frowned. Mine just showed me a man laughing while painting a wall yellow. I think he was happy. That felt oddly intimate. They moved deeper into the archive. Every step brought more memories swirling toward them. Some were joyful, a child blowing bubbles in winter. A woman kissing her own wedding ring goodbye. Others were filled with sorrow, a soldier tearing a letter before mailing it. A mother sitting beside an empty crib, humming a lullaby. And slowly, Rowan began to realize something. These stories weren't just memories. They were stories that had never been told. Unwritten letters. Thoughts never spoken aloud. Feelings that died in silence. They had all gathered here, finding form and voice at last. Ezra murmured, maybe the archive doesn't collect things we forget, it collects what we were too afraid to say. At the heart of the chamber stood a table not made of wood or stone, but woven from the same light text as the walls. On it lay a blank journal. Rowan approached it carefully. Next to it was a quill. No ink pot. Just a glowing point at its tip. Ezra whispered, I think this one's for you. Rowan hesitated. Then he picked it up. And, almost without thinking, he wrote. I wish I had told you how much that last day meant to me. The sentence glowed briefly on the page. Then lifted into the air, and became a ribbon like the others, gently joining the archive. A soft chime rang through the room, like a bell underwater. The entire chamber shifted. The floating ribbons began to swirl gently around them faster, brighter, until the whole space felt like the inside of a snow globe filled with stories. The journal in front of Rowan turned a page by itself. On it was now written. When the unspoken is spoken, the way is clear. Another chime. A new doorway appeared in the far wall, text folding backward like a curtain being drawn. Beyond it, darkness, with tiny lights floating like lanterns down a narrow hallway. Ezra turned to Rowan. One more step. Rowan smiled. Isn't it always? And together, they stepped through the archive's final threshold. The stories around them continued to swirl, but they no longer weighed heavy. Instead, they felt lifted, released. As though each step they took helped someone, somewhere, breathe easier. Because a story told, no matter how small, is a burden halved. The path ahead was uncertain. But Rowan no longer feared uncertainty. He carried the garden, the rock, the archive inside him now. And ahead something still waited to be remembered. Act 9, the realm where stories begin. The hallway beyond the archive stretched far into shadow, its walls pulsing faintly with dim lights like starlight filtered through fog. Rowan and Ezra walked slowly, careful not to speak. Even the sound of their footsteps seemed too loud here, like it could disturb something fragile. The further they walked, the quieter the world became. Not empty, no, not that. There was still presence here. The kind that watched gently, not to judge, but to witness. Like this place existed for no other reason than to hold space for what was possible. At last, the corridor opened. And before them spread something impossible to describe. A horizon of blankness, not white, not black, but pure potential. Like a canvas that hadn't yet chosen its colors. In the distance, shapes flickered in and out of existence, a lighthouse rising from mist and vanishing again, a field of sunflowers that burst into flame before fading to dust, a boy with wings. Drawing circles in the air before dissolving into light. Ezra stepped forward, whispering, "Where are we?" Rowan's voice was barely a breath. "Where stories begin. Before anyone writes them down." They were standing in the inkwell field, the threshold between imagination and manifestation. It wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. Their minds simply knew. Here, the unspoken hopes of dreamers, the almost born thoughts of poets, the stories that never got past the first sentence, all gathered and shimmered in slow orbits, waiting to become real. Rowan took a step onto the shimmering surface. It held his weight like water holds a boat, gently, but ready to shift. He turned to Ezra. "This is where the stories from the archive come to begin again." Ezra followed cautiously. "So this is what comes after memory." They walked together, past fragments that coalesced and scattered like bubbles of narrative. A boy ran by them, laughing, holding a wooden sword and wearing a crown of thorns. Behind him followed a shadow, neither evil nor good, simply curious. The image burst into light and vanished. Next, they passed a bridge suspended in the sky, stretching between two trees that grew upside down. A figure stood in the middle, whispering into a bottle, then casting it into a storm below. The storm swallowed it like a secret too large to carry. Rowan reached for one of the floating orbs of story. As he touched it, a scene unraveled in his mind. A woman in her 70s, sitting by a windowsill, painting with trembling hands. Each stroke was a memory. Each canvas, a day she never shared with anyone. Her name was Ada. She had lived a quiet life, but she had always wanted someone to tell her story. The vision faded. Rowan exhaled, shaken. These aren't just possibilities. They're calls. Ezra touched another. His eyes widened. A father, he spent 20 years building a treehouse for a daughter he never got to meet. He kept adding to it anyway, one piece at a time. They stood there, among these unformed lives, their presence acknowledged but not intruded upon. And then something changed. A shape began to rise from the field. Not a memory. Not a dream. A structure half-formed, flickering, but solidifying with each moment they looked upon it. It took the form of a house. Small, Familiar. Rowan staggered slightly. That's my grandfather's house. He recognized the worn brick path, the ivy-covered walls, the creaky porch swing that groaned when the wind passed. Even the mailbox with the little dent from when he had hit it with a baseball bat at 11 years old. But it wasn't exactly the same. There were windows where there hadn't been. A telescope sat on the roof. The wind chime played a tune he didn't recognize. Ezra whispered, "It's his house, and the stories he never got to tell." The door creaked open on its own. A warm golden light spilled out. And without speaking, they stepped inside. The interior was a collage of every story Rowan's grandfather had hinted at, but never spoken aloud. Walls lined with paintings never painted. Shelves full of books that had titles but no pages. A table set for a dinner that had never been eaten but still smelled like rosemary and honey. In the living room, a record player played a tune not from the past, but from an alternate present, the life he might have lived if he had shared more, opened more, remembered more. A voice echoed not aloud, but inside Rowan's heart. Every story you choose to carry becomes part of you. But the ones you let live, they become part of the world. Ezra stood beside a piano that hadn't existed before. Its keys shimmered faintly with light. He played a single note. It resonated and the house trembled slightly. Outside, the field began to shift. Dozens of shapes, houses, temples, trees, stars, faces began rising from the blankness. Not chaotic. Not random. Called forth. As if Rowan and Ezra's presence had activated a tide of creation. For every memory remembered, a story was now being born. And at the center of the house, resting on a pedestal that hadn't been there before, was a book. Bound in deep violet. Untouched. The title etched in gold leaf. The story yet to be chosen. Rowan approached it. Hands trembling. Beside the book sat two chairs. One for him. One for Ezra. He sat down. The book opened on its own. No pages yet. Only a question. What would you create if you believed the world was listening? Rowan didn't answer aloud. He simply reached for the pen beside it and began to write. Act 10, The Ink That Shapes Worlds. Rowan's hand hovered over the page, fingers trembling slightly as he stared at the words that were beginning to form in front of him. The question was simple, but the weight of it, what would you create if you believed the world was listening, was overwhelming. The house around him, the one he had grown up in, the one that now shimmered between memory and reality, seemed to wait. The air thickened with expectation, and though he could hear the faint crackle of the record player in the background, the room felt impossibly still, as if the very fabric of time had paused, awaiting his choice. Ezra had sat down beside him, though he had not yet touched the pen. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, those sharp, observant eyes were fixed on Rowan, as if silently urging him to make the first move. The soft hum of the music and the crackle of the phonograph filled the space between them, but there was no rush. No sound louder than the beating of Rowan's heart. Rowan exhaled slowly, his mind whirling through 1,000 possible answers. What could he write? What did the world need to hear? He felt, for the first time in his life, the full weight of his own voice, as if the act of speaking of writing could shape more than just his own life. He could touch more than just memories. He could change the course of something far greater than he had ever imagined. But the question still loomed. The question hung in the air. He picked up the pen. As soon as the tip touched the paper, the room seemed to shift. The ink blazed across the page, like fire consuming dry grass. It moved swiftly, effortlessly, as though it already knew what it needed to say. The words formed and reformed lines, looping, curling, bending into something Rowan couldn't quite grasp. Each word was a thread, weaving a tapestry that felt like it was both ancient and new at the same time. And then, it stopped. Rowan pulled the pen away. The words were finished, but they felt like a promise, one that had yet to be fully understood. The ink was still damp on the page, a faint shimmer to it as if the story had not yet settled into place. He turned to look at Ezra, who had been watching intently, but now his gaze flicked from the page to Rowan. "Well?" Ezra asked, his voice tight with anticipation. "What did you write?" Rowan swallowed. His hands felt cold now, as though the room had shifted from warmth to a sudden chill. But when he looked at the page, he saw it clearly. "I write not to remember, but to return. To find what has been forgotten and allow it to grow again." Ezra blinked. That's it?" Rowan nodded slowly. "That's it? But what does it mean?" Rowan took a deep breath. I think this story isn't just for us. It's for everyone who's ever been lost. For everyone who's forgotten the places they came from, the people they loved, the dreams they buried. If you write the world right, you can bring it back into being." Ezra stared at the page, silent for a long time. "So this is about all of it? All the stories, yours, mine, everyone's?" "Not just stories," Rowan replied. "It's about everything we choose to forget because it's too painful, too complicated, too real. But it doesn't go away. It just waits, until someone dares to write it again." The house seemed to hum. Rowan could feel the air shift around them like something had finally clicked into place. The words on the page felt more solid now, not just ink on paper, but a seed planted in the heart of this place, this world between worlds. And then the world moved. The house shimmered, the walls bending in on themselves like the soft curve of a dream. The record player turned slowly, its tune warbling and stretching, blending with the sound of 1,000 voices. The floor beneath their feet rippled, and the light in the room dimmed, turning into an ethereal glow that flickered like starlight. Ezra stood up quickly. "Rowan, what's happening?" Rowan's heart raced. "I don't know. But I think the words we've written are starting to take shape." And they were. Outside, the sky had begun to change, stretching like the pages of a book. A story that hadn't been written yet was unfolding before them. The house, once still and familiar, now seemed to be expanding, its edges blurring into the landscape outside. The trees around them bent and twisted as though they were trying to reach for something they had lost. A figure appeared at the edge of the field, a shadow clothed in light. It was a person, but not anyone Rowan recognized. It was as though this figure had been waiting for them, waiting for their words to unlock something they hadn't realized was locked. The figure stepped forward, and Rowan's breath caught in his throat. It was his grandfather. Older, wiser, yet unmistakably the same. He stood silently for a moment, looking at them with deep, understanding eyes. Then, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "You've written your return. But it's not just for you. It's for everyone who comes after." Rowan stood frozen. "Grandpa." His grandfather smiled faintly. "The stories you carry don't just belong to you. They are part of the world you live in. And now, it's time to let them live." The ground beneath their feet shifted again, and Rowan felt a pull, like something was calling him to the center of this place. The figure the grandfather motioned for him to follow. Without thinking, Rowan stepped forward, and Ezra followed right behind him. The world around them faded into a soft blur, like pages turning too quickly. Rowan felt the shift of reality, the sense that they were moving through time and space at once. The words he had written were no longer just ink on paper. They were shaping the world around them, turning into something far larger than he had ever imagined. They stepped into the heart of the landscape, the world now taking on new dimensions, colors, shapes, sounds. Everything was being written, rewritten, in real time. It was as if every decision, every memory, every unspoken word was being allowed to exist, allowed to breathe. "What do you see?" his grandfather asked, his voice now a faint echo in the air. Rowan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. What he saw was not just a vision, but a world unfolding, a place where stories came alive, a place where words could change everything. The boundaries between what was real and what was imagined no longer held. "It's all here," Rowan said softly. "The past, the future, everything in between. It's all here." "Then choose," his grandfather said. "Because the stories you write now are the ones that will carry us forward." Rowan nodded. And in that moment, he understood. He wasn't just a writer. He was a creator, a part of something that was always evolving, always changing. And the stories he told, the words he chose, had the power to change everything. He turned to Ezra, who was standing silently beside him. "We're not done," Rowan said, his voice filled with conviction. "Not by a long shot." Ezra smiled. "Then let's keep writing." Act 11, The Stories We Choose to Live. The world around them hummed softly, a soft but steady rhythm, like a living heartbeat. Rowan and Ezra stood at the center of the swirling reality, the place where memories and futures began to coalesce, all shaped by the words Rowan had written. The air was thick with possibility, as if every step they took could carve a new path through time, and every thought they had could change the fabric of existence itself. "Do you feel it?" Rowan whispered, almost to himself. Ezra, standing a little to the side, nodded. He wasn't as moved by the stillness as Rowan was, but there was no denying the strange sense of power that filled the space. It wasn't just the weight of memory, it was the weight of creation. They weren't standing in the past, nor were they waiting for the future. They were in a place where both could exist simultaneously. Rowan looked at his grandfather, who stood quietly a few paces away. The older man's face was calm, serene, but his eyes, those sharp, perceptive eyes, never stopped moving, always calculating, always watching. "You wrote it," his grandfather said, breaking the silence. "But now the next part is up to you." Rowan felt a shiver run through him. It was one thing to acknowledge the power of creation, but it was something else entirely to realize that he now had the ability to choose how that power would manifest. "Choose?" Ezra echoed, as though he hadn't quite processed the weight of the statement. "What do you mean by that?" His grandfather smiled faintly, his voice carrying a gravity that made the air around them feel denser. "You are not simply rewriting what has been lost, Rowan. You are deciding what comes next. What is possible. And the world will listen because it already does." Rowan glanced down at the page in front of him. The words he had written were still there, glowing faintly with an energy that seemed to vibrate through his fingertips when he touched them. He could feel the weight of the question again: what would you create if you believed the world was listening? "I didn't realize it would be like this," Rowan said quietly. "I thought I was just writing about the past, memories that weren't mine. But now it feels like the future is mine to shape." Ezra stepped forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "But what do we do with that? What happens when we choose?" "That is the question," his grandfather said softly. "What will you choose?" The words hung in the air, but Rowan didn't have an answer right away. What was there to choose? There was so much to do, so much to change. The power of the pen had never seemed so weighty, and yet, for the first time, he didn't feel paralyzed by it. Instead, he felt a sense of purpose that was growing stronger by the moment. A purpose he wasn't sure he fully understood yet, but one he knew was meant to be realized. "I think," Rowan said slowly, "I think it's time to write something new. Something that can build from everything we've learned, from everything we've lived." Ezra looked at him sharply, his expression changing. "So, you want to rewrite everything?" You want to reshape the world? Rowan's gaze hardened. Not everything. Just the parts that matter. Just the parts that are waiting to be told. And what if, Ezra said, a note of concern creeping into his voice, what if what we write changes everything? What if we can't control it? Rowan took a deep breath. That's the risk, isn't it? To choose what matters. To shape a future that's worth living. There was a long pause as Ezra considered this, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to hold its breath, as if even the very air was waiting for Rowan to make his decision. To choose. Finally, Ezra spoke again, his voice quieter now. And what if we write something that makes people remember not just themselves, but each other? Something that brings people back together. Rowan looked at him, the weight of his words landing with a startling clarity. Yes. Exactly that. Maybe the first step isn't to create something entirely new, but to remind people of what they've forgotten. His grandfather nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with something Rowan couldn't quite place: pride, maybe, or something else. But there was no doubt in the old man's gaze. That is the heart of creation, Rowan. Not just making something from nothing, but rekindling what's already there. Finding the thread that connects us all. Rowan looked down at the journal again. The pen was still in his hand, and the world still waited. It was time. He began to write. The words came easily, flowing from his hand like water from a stream, their power building with every sentence, every line that appeared on the page. He wrote not just for himself but for the world that was waiting to be reminded of the connections it had lost. We forget, but we can also remember. Not just our past, but each other. We can choose to bring the pieces back together. The people we've lost, the stories we've buried, the dreams we've abandoned. They are waiting to be remembered. As soon as the final word was written, the air shifted again. The house around them trembled, not in fear but in recognition. The world outside this place between worlds seemed to hear Rowan's words. And suddenly, the house began to grow. Not physically, but in spirit. The walls extended outward, as though the house was expanding to hold more stories, more lives, more memories. Is it happening? Ezra asked, his voice filled with awe. Rowan stood up, his gaze fixed on the transformation around him. Yes. The world is remembering. And it's pulling us forward. He stepped toward the door of the house, and Ezra followed. As they crossed the threshold, the world outside changed. They were no longer standing in a place suspended between time, they were standing in the heart of now. The world around them was alive with stories, memories, and dreams, all swirling together in a vibrant tapestry of life. People, faces both familiar and new, filled the streets. They were smiling, laughing, sharing their stories. And Rowan realized, with a sense of profound peace, that this was only the beginning. The stories they had written, those that had been lost, and those that had yet to be told, were beginning to shape the world. And as long as they were willing to listen, there would always be more to write, more to create, and more to remember. They walked together into the future, knowing that no matter what came next, the world was finally listening. Act 12, The Consequences of Remembering. The world had shifted again. Rowan and Ezra had walked through the doorway, stepping out of the house where stories were written and forgotten, where memories were given shape and meaning. The sky outside was different, brighter, yet somehow heavier. It felt like the first day of spring, crisp and promising, yet there was a sense of unease that lingered in the air, like the world was holding its breath. They stood in a bustling city, a city unlike any they had ever seen before. It was familiar in a way, yet distorted, as though 100 different realities were layered on top of one another. People moved along the streets, their faces both ordinary and extraordinary, their lives intertwined in a delicate web of memories and dreams. But it was more than just a city. It was a living manifestation of everything Rowan and Ezra had written, every story they had breathed life into. The sky above was clouded, but there were patches of blue peeking through, as though the very air was being rewritten with each passing moment. The buildings that rose around them seemed to pulse with energy, their facades shifting and changing as they moved, like the walls of a house being constructed in real time. The streets seemed to stretch on forever, as though the city itself was an ever-expanding universe of stories waiting to unfold. Ezra looked around, wide-eyed. This is it, isn't it? This is the world we've created. Rowan nodded, his mind still reeling from the events that had brought them here. The power of the pen had always been real, but now it felt different, more tangible, more dangerous. They had shaped this world, yes, but in doing so, they had given it the power to shape them in return. The memories they had pulled from the archive, the stories they had written to bring people back together, had woven themselves into the fabric of the world. But with that creation came a price. The lines between what was real and what was imagined began to blur, and the weight of those memories, both beautiful and painful, began to take its toll. What if we've made a mistake? Rowan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What if we've opened a door we can't close? Ezra turned to him, his face a mixture of awe and concern. We wrote this world. We gave it life. It's ours to shape. But, maybe we didn't see everything. Maybe we didn't think about the consequences. Rowan took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling in. But we can change it, can't we? We have to. As if in response, the world around them trembled. At first, it was subtle, just a slight shift in the air, a ripple that passed through the crowd. But then it grew stronger, faster. People stopped in their tracks, their faces frozen in expressions of confusion, fear, and wonder. The ground beneath them began to crack, fissures of glowing light spreading out like veins in the earth, splitting the city in two. And then, the whispers started. They came at first like faint echoes, murmurs of voices long buried. But soon they grew louder, more insistent, until they were all around them, voices overlapping, drowning each other out in a chaotic symphony of unspoken thoughts and forgotten memories. Ezra stumbled back, his eyes wide with panic. What's happening? Rowan felt the air grow heavier, as if the weight of every story they had written was pressing down on them. It wasn't just memories that were coming to life, it was the unwritten too. The things they had ignored, the things they had left out of their creation. All of it was returning. The cracks in the ground widened, and from them, shapes began to emerge, distorted, fragmented versions of people, places, and things. Some were familiar faces they had seen in the archive, figures from their past, people they had written into being. But others were strange, terrifying, unrecognizable. A figure emerged from the cracks, an old woman with hollow eyes, her face a mask of grief and rage. She looked at Rowan, her voice like a low growl. "You forgot me. You left me behind, and now you must face the consequences." Rowan took a step back, his heart racing. "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she raised her hands, and from her fingertips, shadows spilled out, swirling around her like a storm. The air grew colder, the sky darker, as the shadows began to spread, infecting everything they touched. Buildings twisted, trees withered, and the ground beneath them cracked even further. Ezra grabbed Rowan's arm. "We have to stop this. We have to undo it." Rowan's mind raced. How could they undo what they had written? How could they rewrite a world that was already unfolding around them? Then he remembered. The book. The one they had written together. The one that had changed everything. They had given it life, but they could also take it away. He turned to Ezra. "We need to go back. We need to return to the archive." Ezra nodded without hesitation, pulling Rowan toward the nearest exit. But as they moved, the shadows closed in on them, the whispers growing louder and louder. The city was coming alive in ways they hadn't anticipated, ways they couldn't control. Rowan felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had wanted to change the past. He had wanted to bring people back together, to make the world a better place. But now he was realizing the truth: every story had a cost. Every decision had a consequence. And now, he and Ezra would have to face the consequences of their own creation. Act 13, The Reckoning of Words. The city around them had become a labyrinth of broken memories and unspoken truths. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the cracks in the earth continued to spread, drawing dark shadows into the streets. It was as though the world itself was unraveling, coming apart at the seams as the consequences of their creation took shape. Rowan's breath came in short, ragged gasps, his heart racing with fear and guilt. "We can't let this happen," Rowan muttered, his voice hoarse. Ezra nodded, but the look in his eyes said everything Rowan needed to know. He was terrified too. They had written the world, yes, but they had never anticipated the chaos that would follow. Every word they had written, Every story they had chosen to tell had come to life in ways they couldn't control. The fractures in the ground widened, and with them, the shadows grew darker, more menacing. As they ran through the streets, the memories began to bleed into the present. People they had never known, faces they had never seen, appeared before them, ghosts of the past and echoes of the future, all mingling together in a disorienting swirl. They moved with purpose, but their steps felt heavy, as if the weight of everything they had created was pressing down on them. They reached the edge of the city, where the landscape had shifted into something even more unfamiliar. The sky above them was a swirling mass of black and purple, and the horizon was dotted with strange, towering figures, creatures born of the stories they had written, but now twisted, distorted, and angry. One of them, the figure of the old woman who had emerged from the cracks earlier, stepped forward, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. Her voice echoed through the air, a deep, resonant growl that made Rowan's bones rattle. "You forgot me," she hissed, her voice dripping with bitterness. "You left me behind, and now you must face the consequences. All of you must face them." Rowan stepped back, fear tightening in his chest. "What do you want from us?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The woman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she raised her arms, and with a flick of her wrist, the ground beneath their feet cracked open further. The shadows twisted and surged, engulfing everything in their path. The air grew cold, and the whispers of forgotten stories rose to a deafening crescendo. Ezra gripped Rowan's arm tightly. "We have to get back to the archive," he said, urgency in his voice. "We can't fix this unless we go back. We have to rewrite what we've done." Rowan nodded, but even as he spoke, the world around them shifted again. The shadows began to close in, pressing tighter and tighter, the air thick with the weight of stories gone wrong. The walls of the city began to collapse in on themselves, buildings falling into the abyss as the very fabric of reality seemed to tear apart. "We don't have much time," Rowan said, his voice barely audible over the rising chaos. "We need to undo this. We need to go back and make things right." But as they turned to leave, the woman's voice stopped them. "You can't rewrite what's already been written," she said, her tone mocking. "Once the story is set in motion, it cannot be stopped. The damage is done." Rowan's chest tightened. "We can't just let this happen," he said fiercely. "We can't let the world fall apart because of our mistakes." The woman smiled, her teeth sharp and jagged. "That's the thing about stories," she said softly. "They don't care about your mistakes. They only care about how they end." With a wave of her hand, the city around them trembled again, and the shadows grew darker, more oppressive. Rowan could feel the weight of the world pressing in on him, suffocating him with its power. Ezra looked at him, fear written on his face. "What do we do now?" Rowan swallowed, his mind racing. He thought of the archive, of the stories they had written, of the people they had tried to bring back together. He thought of the words he had written in the journal, "We forget, but we can also remember." Maybe there was still a way to fix this. Maybe they could still rewrite the ending. "I think we need to go back to the beginning," Rowan said quietly, his voice filled with determination. "We need to remember everything. All the stories, all the people. We can't let the past stay buried. We have to bring it all back." Ezra nodded, understanding. "The archive," he said. "We have to return to the source." Rowan turned and began to run, his feet pounding against the cracked earth. Ezra was right behind him, but the shadows weren't far behind either. They could hear the whispers growing louder, the sound of 1,000 forgotten voices rising in unison. The shadows reached out, clawing at their heels, but Rowan didn't stop. He couldn't. Not now. The path back to the archive was winding, treacherous, and dark. Every step they took seemed to pull them further into the void, but Rowan didn't falter. He kept moving forward, his mind focused on the goal. They had to rewrite the story, fix the world before it was too late. Finally, they reached the archive. The doors were wide open, waiting for them, and as they stepped inside, Rowan felt a sense of relief. But it was short-lived. The archive, too, had changed. The shelves were no longer lined with books. Instead, they were filled with empty pages, waiting to be written. The walls were covered in cracks, the once pristine records now torn and frayed. The woman's voice echoed through the space. "You cannot undo what has been done. The stories are already written, and they are not yours to control." Rowan ignored her. He turned to the desk where the journal lay, still open to the page he had written earlier. The words were still glowing faintly, waiting to be changed. He picked up the pen and took a deep breath. "We can't fix everything," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "But we can choose how the story ends." And with that, he began to write. Act 14, The Price of Creation. The moment Rowan's pen touched the page, the world seemed to hold its breath. It wasn't just ink that flowed from the pen. It was the very fabric of existence, rethreading itself. He could feel the words slipping from his fingers, threading through the air like sparks that ignited everything around them. Every letter he wrote seemed to pulse with power, every sentence shaping the world as it unfolded. The archive around them shifted, the empty shelves now filling with stories not written by anyone else, but by the very lives that lived within them. Ezra watched, his eyes wide, as Rowan's words took form. The tension in the room thickened. The air crackled with energy as memories began to rewrite themselves, as time itself seemed to bend around the weight of Rowan's choices. "What are you writing?" Ezra whispered, his voice filled with awe and uncertainty. Rowan didn't answer immediately. He was too immersed in the act of creation. The world was unfolding in his hands, and he knew that whatever he chose to write now would determine the future, their future. He wrote, To remember is to choose. To create is to choose again. This world is ours, and we will decide how it lives. The words shown on the page, glowing brightly, as if the very fabric of the universe responded to their presence. The shadows that had once stretched across the city seemed to recede, as if pushed back by the light of the words themselves. Rowan looked up, feeling a sudden weight lifting off his chest. But just as quickly, the air shifted again. A shadow fell over the room, darker and colder than before. It was like a cloud passing over the sun, blocking the warmth. The walls of the archive seemed to close in around them, and the pages in the air began to flicker, their edges curling as if they were about to disintegrate. "Rowan!" Ezra shouted. "Something's wrong." Rowan's heart skipped a beat as he turned to face the source of the darkness. The figure of the old woman appeared before them again, her face twisted with anger and sorrow. Her eyes gleamed with an eerie light as she stepped forward, her voice cold and sharp. "You think you can rewrite it all?" She spat, her voice laced with venom. "You can't control what has already been written. Your choices have consequences, boy. And now you will face them." The world around them seemed to ripple, the edges of reality warping and distorting. The floor beneath them cracked open, and the shadows began to pour in, spreading like ink spilling across a page. The weight of the unspoken stories, the forgotten memories, the things they had left unsaid, it all came crashing down on them, filling the room with an overwhelming presence. Rowan's hand trembled as he reached for the journal. He had written with the intention of fixing everything, of making things right, but now it felt as if everything was unraveling. "You can't erase the past," the woman said, her voice growing louder. "You can't just write over what has already been done. The past is alive within you. It's part of you, and it will never go away." Ezra took a step back, his face pale. What is she talking about? Rowan felt a cold sweat break out on his skin. He had written to bring people back together, to reshape the world, but now he realized he had underestimated the power of what he had created. The world was listening, yes, but what if it was listening to more than just their words? "What do you want from us?" Rowan demanded, his voice shaking. The woman's eyes narrowed, her expression a mix of sorrow and fury. "You wanted to rewrite the world, but you didn't understand what it would cost. Everything you've written, every choice you've made, it's all here alive, waiting. You can't erase it. You can't control it. You'll never be free of it." Rowan's heart raced. This was what he had feared. They had written a world that was too powerful to control, too fragile to manipulate. And now, the consequences were coming back to claim what was theirs. "You're wrong," Rowan said, his voice growing stronger. "I don't want to control the world. I want to create it with it, not against it. I wrote because I believed that we could change. We can shape the future, yes, but we can also remember what we've learned. We can write a story that's worth telling. The woman's face twisted into something unrecognizable: rage, disbelief, and something else, something that might have been hope. You think you can choose what happens next? She sneered. You think you can just rewrite the ending? Rowan stood his ground. Yes. Yes, we can. It's not about erasing the past, it's about learning from it. It's about giving the stories the endings they deserve. Ezra stepped forward, his voice firm. You're not the only one who's been forgotten. We've all been forgotten, in one way or another. But that doesn't mean we can't find our way back. The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering with something new, something almost human. And in that moment, Rowan understood. The stories they had written, the memories they had uncovered, were not just theirs to shape. They were part of a larger, interconnected whole, a world of stories waiting to be told. It wasn't about erasing the past or rewriting it in the image of what they wanted. It was about embracing the past, learning from it, and building something new from what had been forgotten. Rowan picked up the pen again, but this time, he didn't write for himself. He wrote for the world. He wrote, "To remember is to choose, and to choose is to shape the world we live in. We will not erase the past. We will build upon it. And together, we will create a future worth remembering." The words shone brightly on the page, and for the first time, the shadows that had filled the room began to recede. The darkness lifted, replaced by a soft, warm light that seemed to fill the space with the promise of new beginnings. The woman looked at him for a long moment, her face softening. Then, without a word, she vanished, her form dissolving into the air like smoke. Rowan exhaled, his breath shaking. The world around them was changing, and with it, the weight of their choices. But there was hope now. Hope that they could create something new, something real. Ezra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do you think it's over?" Rowan nodded, though he knew the real work was just beginning. "It's only just begun." They turned to leave the archive, their footsteps echoing in the now quiet room. The world outside had changed, yes, but it wasn't over. The stories were still being written, and they still had a part to play. Act 15, The Echoes of Creation. The world around them had changed, and yet, it felt like they were still standing at the edge of something much larger than themselves. Rowan and Ezra stood at the threshold of the city they had written into being, the world pulsing with a quiet energy, alive, breathing, uncertain. Every step they took seemed to resonate with the weight of their choices, and every breath they drew felt like an echo from the future, reverberating back to the moment they first put pen to paper. They walked through the streets of the city, and it was as though they were seeing it for the first time. The buildings, once shimmering with the newness of creation, now showed signs of age, cracks in the walls, fading light, like the world had already lived 1,000 stories in the brief time it had existed. But it wasn't just the city that had changed. It was them too. The words they had written, the memories they had rekindled, had left a mark on their hearts, and that mark was both a burden and a gift. Ezra looked at Rowan, his expression unreadable. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. The weight of their decisions pressed down on him like a storm cloud, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face what they had unleashed. The city around them seemed to mirror his thoughts, alive with possibility, but darkened with uncertainty. "I don't know," Rowan finally said. "I thought we could fix everything. I thought we could write the world into a better place. But now I'm not so sure." Ezra stopped walking, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe it wasn't about fixing things. Maybe it was about learning to live with them." Rowan turned to face him. "Learning to live with the consequences of our choices." "Yeah," Ezra said quietly. "We can't undo what we've done. But we can choose how we live with it. We can choose to make something out of the mess we created." Rowan nodded, the weight in his chest easing just a little. "Maybe you're right. But it's not just us, is it? It's the whole world now. The stories we wrote, they're not just ours. They belong to everyone." The wind picked up, rustling through the trees lining the streets. It was soft, almost like a whisper, as if the world itself was speaking to them. The air smelled like rain, like change. They reached the edge of the city, where the landscape shifted once more. The buildings faded away, replaced by wide fields of tall grass, their tops bending in the wind like waves on an ocean. In the distance, Rowan could see something else, a faint outline, barely visible against the setting sun. It was a figure, standing still and solitary. "I don't think this place is finished," Ezra said, his voice filled with a quiet sense of awe. Rowan felt a knot form in his stomach. "We've been changing things so quickly. I think we've forgotten to ask if we're ready for it." They walked toward the figure, the wind picking up again as they neared. It was a man, standing with his back to them, his face obscured by the shadows of the setting sun. As they got closer, Rowan realized that the man wasn't just standing there, he was waiting. "Who is he?" Rowan murmured. Ezra's eyes narrowed. "I don't know. But I think he's been waiting for us." The man turned slowly, and Rowan felt his breath catch. He was older than them, his face weathered with age, but his eyes were unmistakable. They were the same eyes Rowan had seen in the archive, the same eyes that had watched over him from the pages of forgotten stories. "Grandpa," Rowan whispered. The man smiled softly, his expression filled with a mixture of sadness and pride. "I'm glad you finally made it, Rowan." Rowan stepped forward, his heart racing. "But, how? I saw you were gone. I thought you were just a memory." His grandfather chuckled softly, the sound warm and familiar. I'm not a memory, Rowan. Not anymore. The wind blew through the field, and Rowan felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what was happening, but he felt the truth of it deep in his bones. The world around him was alive, too alive. It was as if everything he had ever written, everything he had ever remembered, was here with him now, breathing alongside him. This world, his grandfather continued, his voice low and filled with meaning, is not just your creation. It is ours. All of us. The stories we carry, whether we choose to tell them or not, are always with us. And now, it's time for you to decide how to carry them forward. Rowan shook his head. I don't understand. We created this place. We chose to write it. And now it's all falling apart. The shadows we didn't think about, they're everywhere. His grandfather placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip warm and firm. That's the thing about creation, Rowan. It's not always clean. It's not always perfect. But it's real. And the real world is messy. It's full of things we don't understand. The stories you wrote, the memories you revived, they're part of you now. And they'll always be part of the world. The question is, what will you do with them? Rowan felt the weight of his grandfather's words settle into his chest. The stories they had written, the memories they had uncovered, were never meant to be erased or controlled. They were meant to be lived. To be shared. To be carried forward, no matter how messy or broken they were. He looked up at his grandfather, a new sense of clarity in his eyes. We can't control everything. But we can choose to live with it. To move forward, even when we don't know exactly where we're going. His grandfather smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. Exactly. And that's what makes us human. The choice to keep going, no matter what. The choice to live the stories we tell. Rowan nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. He had spent so long trying to rewrite the world, trying to fix what he thought was broken. But now he understood. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about living in it. Embracing it. Carrying it with him as he moved forward. We can't undo what we've done, Rowan said softly. But we can choose how we move forward. Together. Ezra stepped up beside him, his expression resolute. And we'll make sure we do it right this time. Rowan smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Yeah. We will. Together, they turned and began to walk into the field, the sun setting behind them. The world around them was vast and uncertain, but for the first time, Rowan didn't feel afraid. The stories they had written were not just their own. They belonged to everyone. And as long as they carried them forward with open hearts, there would always be a chance for something new to grow. Act 16, The Weight of Choice. Rowan and Ezra walked through the field, their steps slow and measured, as the world around them seemed to pause in anticipation. The sky, once streaked with the soft colors of sunset, now dimmed into an almost unnatural twilight. The landscape stretched endlessly, but it felt like they were standing at the edge of something vast, something unknown. For the first time since they had started writing, Rowan felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. The words they had written had shaped this world, yes. They had brought people together, rekindled memories long buried, and rewritten what had been lost. But now, it seemed as though that power came at a cost. The city they had built, the world they had created wasn't perfect. It wasn't a utopia. There were cracks. Do you feel it? Rowan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ezra glanced around, his eyes darkened by the weight of the world they had shaped. Yeah. It's like the world is on the edge of something, but I don't know if it's good or bad. Rowan nodded, his mind racing. He had wanted to fix things, to make the world better, but now it felt like every decision, every word they had written, had consequences that they couldn't fully anticipate. They had given the world life, but in doing so, they had also unleashed forces they couldn't control. Do you think we did the right thing? Ezra asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I mean, we wanted to bring people together, right? We wanted to create a better world. But now, I don't know. Rowan took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I think we gave people a chance. A chance to remember, to reconnect, to rewrite their own stories. But we didn't account for everything. We didn't realize how much choice we were giving them. And maybe some stories are better left untold. Ezra glanced at him, eyes wide. You're not saying we should undo it all, are you? Rowan's gaze softened. No. I'm not saying that. But we can't ignore the consequences of what we've done. The world isn't just what we've written. It's what everyone decides to write from here on out. They reached the edge of the field, where the city loomed in the distance, now obscured by a thick mist. The air was dense, heavy with the weight of 1,000 forgotten stories, and as they walked closer, they began to hear faint whispers. Words, lost and forgotten, swirling around them like ghosts of the past. It's like they're calling us, Ezra said, his voice trembling. The stories we didn't write. The ones we left behind. Rowan felt a chill run down his spine. He had written to connect people, to bring them together, but now it felt as though the world was pushing back. The stories that had been left unsaid, the ones that had been buried, were beginning to resurface, demanding to be heard. He reached out, touching the air before them, and the whispers grew louder. They weren't just whispers. They were voices. Voices from the past. Voices from the future. Rowan. A voice called, soft but clear. Ezra, help us. Rowan froze, his heart pounding. The voice sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it. It was as though he had heard it before, in a memory long forgotten. He turned to Ezra, but his friend's face was pale, his expression haunted. "Do you hear it?" Ezra asked, his voice barely audible. Rowan nodded, his throat dry. "It's them. The stories we missed. The ones we didn't tell." Without thinking, he stepped forward, moving toward the city. The mist seemed to part for him, like the world itself was clearing a path. As he entered the city, the streets seemed to stretch out before him, familiar but distorted. The buildings were there, but they were shifting, twisting, as though the very fabric of reality was bending and breaking under the weight of all the stories. And then he saw it. A figure stood in the middle of the street, a silhouette shrouded in light and shadow. It was impossible to tell who they were, but Rowan knew, with a sense of certainty, that this was the source of the voices. The figure stepped forward, their eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. "You've written the world," the figure said, their voice both familiar and alien. "But you've forgotten something. Something important." Rowan's heart skipped a beat. "What? What have we forgotten?" The figure tilted their head, their gaze piercing. "You've forgotten that the world is not just stories. It is not just words. It is people. People who live and breathe and choose. You've given them a chance to rewrite the world, but now they must live with the choices they've made. And some of them will make the wrong choices." The figure's words hit Rowan like a punch to the gut. The weight of their creation, the weight of everything they had done, suddenly felt unbearable. He had wanted to give people the chance to change, to shape their own destinies. But now he understood the truth. It wasn't just about rewriting the past. It was about living with the choices they had made. The figure extended a hand. "Come. See what you've created. See the consequences of your actions." Rowan stepped forward, his body moving on its own. Ezra followed, but Rowan could see the fear in his eyes. The figure led them through the streets, showing them glimpses of what the world had become. Some people had embraced the change. They had connected, they had built new relationships, new families, new communities. But others had used their newfound power for darker purposes. They had rewritten the world to suit their own desires, their own needs. And the world was beginning to fray at the edges. "Some stories cannot be rewritten," the figure said softly. "Some choices are irreversible." Rowan stopped. "What do we do? How do we fix this?" The figure's gaze softened, their eyes filled with understanding. "You can't fix it, Rowan. You can only learn from it. You can only choose to move forward, knowing that the world is built on the choices we make. Every word, every story, every choice. They all matter. Rowan closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the moment settle into his chest. He had wanted to fix everything. But now he realized that the world wasn't something they could control. It was something they had to live with, and live for. He looked at Ezra, who stood silently beside him, his eyes filled with the same understanding. "We can't rewrite it," Rowan said quietly, "but we can live with it. And we can choose how to move forward." Ezra nodded, a small but firm smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Together. And together, they turned toward the future. Act 17, The Path Forward. The city around them, once a shining symbol of their creation, now felt like a fragile dream on the edge of collapse. Rowan stood at the edge of the shattered street, gazing into the distance where the world stretched out, both beautiful and broken, filled with possibilities, but also the weight of their consequences. The choice they had made to rewrite everything had given the world life, but it had also unleashed chaos. People had used the power they were granted in ways Rowan had never imagined. And now, with the echoes of their decisions ringing in his ears, he had to find a way forward. "We can't keep running from this," Rowan said, his voice filled with both resolve and fear. "We created this world, and now it's our responsibility to make sure it doesn't fall apart." Ezra stood beside him, his expression just as heavy. "We wrote it, yeah. But it's bigger than us now. The stories we gave life to, they're living on their own now. And some of them are going in directions we never thought they would." Rowan nodded, his thoughts swirling with the memories of all the people, places, and dreams they had tried to rebuild. Some had embraced the changes, used the new world to grow, to reconnect. Others had twisted it to fit their desires, their own selfish ambitions. The world they had created was alive with stories, but not all of those stories were beautiful. "We need to help them," Rowan said, his voice determined. "The ones who are lost in the chaos. We need to find a way to help the world remember why we gave it life in the first place." Ezra exhaled sharply. "We can't force them to remember, Rowan. Not all of them want to." Rowan looked back at the broken streets of the city, where memories still lingered in the air like ghosts. There was no turning back now. The words had been written. The stories had been set in motion. But if they were to fix the damage, if they were to help those who were lost, they would have to rewrite the rules together. "There has to be a way," Rowan said softly, more to himself than anyone else. And then, as if the world was listening, the air shifted. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to darken, pulling the horizon into sharp contrast. From the edge of the city, a figure appeared, one they hadn't seen in a long time. A woman, her face obscured by shadows, standing tall and defiant. Rowan recognized her immediately. "The woman from the cracks," Ezra muttered, his tone filled with caution. Rowan took a step forward, his heart pounding. "What do you want?" The woman stepped closer, her presence heavy with the weight of everything that had gone wrong. "You think you can fix what you've broken?" she asked, her voice cold, almost mocking. "You can't undo the chaos you've unleashed. The world will always remember. And those memories, they're alive." Rowan clenched his fists. "We know the world is alive. But that doesn't mean it's beyond saving." The woman's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't kind. "You're wrong. Once a story is written, it lives. And it can't be erased. You can't undo the choices others have made with the power you gave them." Ezra stepped forward, his expression fierce. "You don't get to decide that. We gave people the choice to live differently. They can still change. We can still make things right." The woman laughed softly, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. "It's not that simple, child. The world doesn't listen to you anymore. You can't control what it becomes. It's already too late." Rowan shook his head, refusing to back down. "It's never too late." The woman's eyes glinted with something dark. "We'll see about that." And with a flick of her wrist, the world around them began to shift again. The city, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed to decay before their eyes. The streets cracked open like the pages of a book torn apart. The buildings, once gleaming with the light of creation, began to crumble, their foundations weakening under the weight of forgotten stories. Shadows crept through the streets, consuming everything in their path. The whispers, the echoes of the past, the forgotten dreams grew louder, their voices blending together into a deafening roar. Rowan felt the ground beneath him tremble, and he realized this wasn't just a vision. It was happening. The world was falling apart, piece by piece, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The shadows were taking over, spreading like ink across the pages of a book. "We have to stop it," Rowan said, his voice rising with urgency. "We have to save the people who are still trying to make this world work." Ezra nodded, determination in his eyes. "Then we need to find the center. The place where all these stories are connected. The archive. That's where it started. That's where it can end." Rowan looked around, his heart heavy with the weight of what they were facing. The city was collapsing, the cracks in the streets widening. But in the distance, just beyond the horizon, there was a faint light. A beacon. "It's the archive," Rowan said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have to go back. We have to find the heart of it all." Ezra didn't hesitate. "Let's go. Now." The world around them continued to crumble, the shadows pressing closer with every step they took. But Rowan and Ezra moved forward, determined to reach the archive before it was too late. Every story, every choice, every memory that had been written was now at risk of being lost forever. As they reached the edge of the city, the landscape before them stretched out like an endless maze of broken roads and fractured memories. The light from the archive flickered in the distance, a fragile beacon of hope in a world on the brink of collapse. Rowan's heart raced as they ran toward it, the shadows still closing in. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. The future of the world of all the stories they had written was in their hands now. The woman's voice echoed in the distance, but it was growing fainter. You can't change it? You can't rewrite it? Rowan gritted his teeth. We'll see about that. They reached the archive, its towering structure looming before them, its doors wide open. As they stepped inside, the world around them shifted again. The walls of the archive, once filled with stories and memories, were now empty. The shelves were barren. The air was thick with silence. This is it, Rowan said, his voice barely a whisper. This is where it all began. Ezra nodded, his expression grim. And this is where it ends. Rowan stepped forward, the weight of everything they had done pressing down on him. He knew what he had to do. He had to write again. To choose again. But this time, the words had to be different. This time, they had to be the ones to write the ending. He picked up the pen. Act 18, the final choice. The archive stood before them, its doors wide open, but the once grand structure was now a hollow shell. The shelves were empty, the air thick with silence. Rowan felt an unease settle in his chest as he stepped inside, every part of the archive now unfamiliar to him. This was where it all began. And this was where it would all end. The weight of everything they had written, everything they had tried to fix, pressed heavily on him. Ezra stood next to him, his face reflecting the same uncertainty. They had come this far, through all the chaos, the challenges, and the consequences of their own choices. The world they had written was on the brink of collapse, and now, in the very heart of the archive, they had one last chance to make things right. I thought we could control it, Rowan muttered, more to himself than to Ezra. I thought we could rewrite the world, give everyone a chance to fix what was broken. Ezra didn't respond immediately. He just nodded, his gaze distant, as though lost in thought. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe it wasn't about fixing things. Maybe it was about choosing. Rowan turned to look at him, his eyes narrowing. Choosing what? Ezra met his gaze, his voice steady. Choosing how to live with what we've created. Accepting the choices we've made, the consequences, and moving forward from there. We can't undo what's been written. But we can choose how it ends. Rowan absorbed the weight of Ezra's words. Could they really choose the end? Could they decide how all this would unfold, even after everything that had happened? The archive, once a place of possibility and creation, now felt more like a tomb, a place where forgotten stories were meant to stay buried. And yet, as he stood there, surrounded by empty shelves, he realized that perhaps this was exactly what he had to do. This wasn't just about rewriting. This was about choosing how to move forward. The power to write wasn't just about controlling the world, it was about understanding it, accepting it, and choosing to live with it. He stepped toward the center of the archive, where a pedestal stood. It was empty, waiting for something. Rowan knew exactly what it was waiting for. He could feel it in his bones. "What do we do now?" Ezra asked, his voice laced with a mixture of uncertainty and hope. Rowan reached for the empty pedestal, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. He could feel the energy of the archive, the weight of every story, every memory, pressing down on him. He knew that whatever he wrote here would be the final choice. The world could not be rewritten again. This was it. This was their final act. "I don't know," Rowan whispered. "But I think it's time to let go. To stop trying to control everything and just let it be." Ezra didn't speak, but Rowan could see the understanding in his eyes. They had spent so much time trying to control their world, trying to rewrite it into something perfect. But now, they had to face the reality that perfection wasn't possible. The world they had created, flawed and broken as it was still theirs to live in. And it was time to accept that. He turned to the pedestal and took a deep breath, ready to make the final choice. The pen was already there, waiting for him. And then, the world seemed to shift. The archive trembled, and the shelves began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter and brighter, until the entire room was filled with light. Rowan looked around, his heart racing. The air hummed with energy, the very walls seeming to pulse with life. He could hear the whispers again, the echoes of all the stories that had been written and forgotten, all the voices of people long gone. He gripped the pen, and as soon as the tip of it touched the page, everything seemed to stop. The whispers fell silent. The air thickened. And the world waited. "To remember is to choose," he wrote, the words flowing from him effortlessly. "To live with what we've written is to live with ourselves. We are the stories we choose to tell, and the world we create is the one we choose to live in." The words shone brightly on the page, and as they did, the archive seemed to breathe. The shelves filled with light, and the air around them shifted, settling into a new kind of stillness. It was as though the world was waiting for these words, like the end of a long, unfinished story. Rowan stood back, his breath shallow. Had he done it? Had he chosen the right thing? Would these words be enough to fix everything? Ezra stepped up beside him, his eyes wide with awe. It's done. It's really done." Rowan felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. "I think it is. I think we've finally written the ending." But as they stood there, the ground beneath them trembled once again. The world outside this time, the real world was shifting once more. The ground cracked beneath them, and the sky above darkened. Rowan's heart raced as the energy from the archive grew more intense. "No," he whispered, fear rising in his chest. "It can't be." Ezra looked around, his face full of confusion and worry. "What's happening?" The figure of the old woman, the one who had warned them, appeared again, standing at the edge of the archive. Her eyes were wide with both sadness and something else, something closer to understanding. "You can't control it," she said softly. "You can't control the world, Rowan. You can't choose how it ends. All you can do is live with it. Choose to live with it." Rowan felt his knees go weak, the weight of her words crushing him. "But what if we made a mistake?" The woman smiled, her expression softening. "There are no mistakes in stories, Rowan. There are only choices. And those choices will always carry consequences." Ezra stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "We've accepted those consequences. And we'll live with them." Rowan nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle in his chest. He had done what he could. The world was no longer something to control. It was something to live with. And with that understanding, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The archive began to fade, the light dimming, the shelves emptying. The city outside, once fractured and broken, was now whole again, its streets filled with life. The stories they had written, both the good and the bad, were still there, still alive, still waiting to be told. But now, Rowan knew, it was no longer about rewriting the world. It was about living in it. Embracing it. Choosing to be part of the story, no matter where it led. "We're ready," Rowan said quietly, turning to Ezra. Ezra smiled. "We've always been ready." And together, they stepped out of the archive, into a world that was still being written, but this time with a new understanding. A world where every choice mattered, and every story had the power to shape the future. Act 19, The New Beginning. Rowan and Ezra stood side by side, the weight of the past still hanging in the air. The world around them had changed. It had been written, rewritten, and, in some cases, undone, but now, at the very edge of everything they had created, they found themselves standing at the threshold of something new. The sun had risen over the city, casting a warm golden light across the buildings that had once seemed so fragile. The cracks in the streets had healed, the dust settled, and the shadows that had once loomed over them now seemed to recede. The world, still alive with possibility, was waiting. Waiting for them to choose how to move forward. Rowan felt it, the weight of their choices. The world was not perfect. It never had been. But now, there was an understanding between him and Ezra. The stories they had written, the lives they had touched, were no longer just reflections of their own desires. They were real. And with that reality came responsibility. The wind stirred, and Rowan closed his eyes, breathing in the air, thick with the scent of the earth. The world had always been alive with stories. They had written it into being, but it had grown beyond them. The lines between what was created and what was real had blurred, and Rowan realized, with a quiet certainty, that it was no longer about rewriting the past or controlling the future. It was about living in it, in whatever form it took. Ezra glanced at him, a quiet smile playing on his lips. "Ready?" Rowan turned to face him, his expression resolute. "I think so. It's just, I've never felt this kind of weight before. It's like I'm standing on the edge of everything we've ever written, everything we've ever known." "We've chosen this," Ezra said. "We chose to create. And now we choose to live with it." Rowan nodded. "Yeah. We choose to live with it." They walked through the streets, each step feeling like a new chapter. The city around them was alive, but it wasn't perfect. People moved through the streets, busy with their lives, but there was something different now. They had all been part of the story, and now, as they moved forward, they carried the weight of it. They were no longer just characters in a world that someone else had written. They were writers too. Creators. The lines between what was written and what was lived had blurred, and it was up to them to shape the future. Rowan turned to Ezra, his voice quieter now. "Do you ever think we made a mistake?" Ezra shook his head. "I think we did what we had to do. We didn't know how it would turn out. But we did our best. And now, we just have to live with it." They passed people in the streets, each of them carrying their own stories. Some looked up, their faces filled with wonder, as though seeing the world for the first time. Others moved forward, focused, determined to shape their own paths. But all of them, in some way, were part of the same story. A story that had started with a choice. "We gave them choice," Rowan said, his voice thoughtful. "But we gave ourselves choice too. We chose how we wanted to live in this world. We chose to write it, but we also chose to live in it." Ezra smiled. "And that's the hardest part, isn't it? Choosing to live with what we've created, to accept the consequences and still move forward. But that's the power we have. We choose." Rowan nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle in his chest. "Yeah. We choose." The sun was setting as they continued their walk, the sky above them now painted in shades of orange and pink. The world was no longer the chaotic mess it had been. The stories they had written, the world they had shaped, were real now. But it was also a world that they had to live in. They couldn't control it. They couldn't erase the mistakes. But they could choose to live with it. They could choose to be part of it. As they reached the edge of the city, where the buildings thinned out and the open fields stretched out before them, Rowan stopped. The landscape had changed. The city behind them had grown, but beyond it, there was space. Space for new stories to begin. "We're here," Rowan said, his voice filled with wonder. Ezra stepped up beside him, looking out at the horizon. "Yeah. We are." Rowan looked down at the ground beneath their feet, the grass swaying gently in the breeze. It was a new beginning. Not a perfect one, but a beginning all the same. "We don't know what's ahead," Rowan said, his voice filled with a quiet determination. "But we'll write it together. And we'll live it together." Ezra smiled, his eyes gleaming with the same quiet resolve. Together. And together, they stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Because they had chosen to be part of the story. They had chosen to live in it, to shape it, and to accept that some parts of it would always be out of their control. But they had also chosen to move forward, to create new beginnings from the old, to live with the weight of their choices, and to carry the stories they had written into the future. Act 20, The End and the Beginning. The world was still. For the first time in a long while, Rowan felt the full weight of silence. The hum of creation, the ever-shifting energy that had filled their journey, that had pushed them to write and rewrite, to choose and to build, had quieted. Everything around them was still and waiting, like the final pause before the last note of a song. They stood on the edge of the field, where the city had once been a sprawling maze of stories. But now, it had transformed, become something quieter, more grounded. People moved about their lives, but there was a peace, a stillness that wasn't there before. A world at rest. Rowan turned to Ezra, his face a reflection of the exhaustion they both carried. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Ezra, standing beside him, took a long, deep breath. "I don't think there's a right or wrong choice anymore. It's all part of the story. But I do know one thing, we're here. And we can't undo what we've done. All we can do is move forward." Rowan nodded. He had come to understand that this was what it meant to live with the consequences of creation, to embrace the world they had shaped, with all its imperfections, its beauty, and its flaws. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the world around them, the stories they had revived, the lives they had touched. Everything they had written had changed the course of so many lives, for better or worse. And now, the world wasn't just waiting for them. It was waiting for everyone. Ezra looked out across the field. "Look at it," he said quietly. "It's a mess. But it's ours. And it's alive." Rowan followed his gaze. The city in the distance was filled with people, all living their stories, sharing their lives. Some were rebuilding, others were moving on. There were faces, familiar and strange, lost in the shuffle of their own paths. The world was still uncertain, but it was real. And it was moving. "I think we can still help them," Rowan said, his voice filled with new determination. Help them write their own stories, help them choose their own paths. You think we can teach them? Ezra asked, turning back to Rowan. We already did, Rowan replied softly. We gave them the power to choose. We showed them that they could live with their stories, no matter how messy they were. We don't need to fix everything. We just need to help them live with it. Ezra smiled, his expression now filled with hope. Maybe that's the point. We can't rewrite everything, but we can help others rewrite themselves. Rowan's heart lifted. This was the truth he had been searching for. It wasn't about controlling the world. It was about giving people the freedom to control their own stories, to live with the choices they had made, and to shape the future with the lessons of the past. But where do we begin? Ezra asked, his voice filled with quiet wonder. Rowan looked out over the field, where the city loomed, still alive with possibility. We begin with the people. We begin by sharing what we've learned. As they walked toward the city, Rowan felt the weight of everything they had done, but now it felt more like a burden they could carry, not something that would crush them. The world wasn't perfect. It never had been. But they had given it life. And they had given people the tools to create their own future. The streets were filled with faces, people moving through their daily lives. Some recognized Rowan and Ezra, their expressions filled with gratitude, others with curiosity. But all of them were connected by something deeper now, a shared understanding of the stories they carried. Rowan stopped in front of a group of people, a family, standing together near the edge of the street. Their faces were worn, but there was a warmth in their eyes, a spark of hope. He knew that they were not unlike many others. They had lived through hardships, and now, they had to choose what came next. He stepped forward, his voice steady. You've all written your stories. And now it's time to write the next chapter. You don't have to do it alone. You have the power to create, to change, to live your truth. The family looked at him, unsure at first, but slowly, they began to understand. One by one, they nodded, their faces softening with understanding. Ezra joined him, his voice also filled with conviction. The world will always be uncertain. There will always be shadows, always be things we can't control. But we have the power to choose. We can shape our stories by the choices we make. And in that moment, Rowan realized that this was the true gift they had given the world. Not the ability to control the future, but the freedom to live it. The world was never meant to be perfect. It was always meant to be lived. To be shaped by every decision, every story, every moment. They walked through the streets, reaching out to those they met, sharing the truth they had learned. That the world was not something they could control. It was something they had to live with, and by living with it, they could change it. Hours passed, and as the sun began to set, Rowan and Ezra found themselves back at the edge of the city, looking out at the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink and purple, the colors of a world that was still in motion. A world that was still being written. "I think we did it," Ezra said quietly, his eyes scanning the city behind them. Rowan smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. "Yeah, we did." And as they stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they knew that the world they had created would continue to grow. It would evolve, it would change, but it would never be finished. Because the stories of the world were never meant to end. They were always meant to be lived. Epilogue, a world unwritten. The world had never been about perfection. It was about choices. And as Rowan and Ezra looked out at the world they had written, they knew that their story was only one among many. Every person had the power to write their own chapter, to live their own truth, and to create the future with every choice they made. The world would continue to evolve, to shift, to grow. And every person, every memory would have the chance to tell their own story. Together, they would write the next chapter. Because the story of the world was never really finished. It was always unfolding.